Hey guys, today I'm going to give you an introduction to statistics and teach you all about populations and samples. By the end of this lesson, you'll be able to determine the population and sample in real-world situations that involve data collection. So go ahead and get out your binder, turn to the math section, and get ready to take some notes. Let's start by talking about what statistics are generally, and then we'll get into our conversation specifically about what population and samples are. Statistics is the science of collecting, organizing, presenting, analyzing, and interpreting data to assist in making more effective decisions. And we don't just see statistics in our math class, we see it in our daily lives. Take a look at some of these infographics and look at some real life examples of statistics. In this first image, you can see a comparison of LeBron James and Michael Jordan's basketball careers. You can see per game statistics, you can see average per season statistics, you can see field goal percentages. All of that information is being collected to compare these two players. When we see statistics in real life, we might see them as percentages or numbers like we saw here, but you also might see them in bar graphs or pie charts. When you do that, you can start seeing trends in data. So for example, in this one, as education increases, so does your yearly pay. Statistical data can also be convincing, like you see in this infographic here. Using 3 sample students that read 20 minutes per day, 5 minutes a day, and 1 minute per day, this study has collected enough data to make predictions about how many words that student would hear per year, how many hours they would have read for by 6th grade, and then how well we can predict they would do on standardized tests. In all of these examples, it's important to understand that statistics can be used to gain information about a population by examining a sample of the population. So let's get into that discussion about population and samples with this infographic about favorite color by country. Now, this is from YouGov, and on their website, it says a worldwide survey reveals that blue is the most popular color in 10 countries across 4 continents. But I don't remember taking a survey asking me what my favorite color was. That's because it would probably be impossible to ask every single person in every single one of these countries what's their favorite color and then collect that data below. So instead, we design surveys and ask samples of a population what the favorite color is to get a better sense of what the majority's favorite color is. So let's get some of this vocabulary down about population and samples. A sample is a subset of an entire group. A subset means that it's part of it. For example, vowels are a subset of the alphabet. 7th graders are a subset of the school. In all of those examples, the portion of that group of the population has specific characteristics in common. When you collect data from that sample, that's called your sample statistic. So in this example where we found the world's favorite colors, we would look at the sample being Britain or Germany or United States. All these countries are the samples. The sample statistic is the piece of information you get from the fraction of the population. So the information would be the colors. And obviously you can't ask every single person in the population, so you would ask a sample of it. So I've already talked about this word a few times, but populations are the whole group. If you were to collect data from the entire population, you would have found a population statistic. So in the alphabet example, the alphabet is the population. The consonants would be a sample of the population. In the favorite color example, the population would be every member of all these countries, and the sample might be just one country. Or if you zoom in closer, you could think like the United States is the population, and the sample would be the people selected from the United States to get those trends in that data. The big idea here is that populations are the big group. Samples are parts of it. And we use sample statistics to make inferences about entire populations, especially when it's not realistic, practical, or possible to survey the entire population and get a population statistic. So let's look at some of these examples below. The following statements below here are populations. Determine the possible sample that could be part of the population. I'll do the first one for you. It says the population is people living in a specific neighborhood. So one sample of that could be the elderly people within the neighborhood. You could have also said the children in the neighborhood. Take a second look at these two populations and try to see if you can come up with some samples that could be part of that population. Pause the video now and then press play when you're ready to check. All right, so here are some of the examples that I came up with for samples within these populations. The key idea is that you picked a part of the bigger group. So families with children could be families with only one child. For the population seniors at East High School, your sample could be seniors who drive their car to school. Now, you don't want to put freshmen at the high school or sophomores at the high school. The sample should come from within the population. So it can't be a different group. It needs to be part of the bigger group. And as long as you said something like that, then you probably did it right. The next example shows you some samples. What are some possible populations they could be a part of? I'll go first. If the sample is kids who play football for the YMCA, the population could be people in general who participate in YMCA programs. So take a second, see if you can come up with something that could be a population for these two samples below. Pause the video now and press play when you're ready to check. All right, so here's what I came up with for these two. For students who were on the B honor roll for the first 9 weeks, the population could be all students enrolled during the first 9 weeks. For households that have cable in the Riverside apartment complex, the population could be all households in the apartment complex. The key words here are all. You want to make sure that you're looking at a population as the bigger picture, and then the subset of that is the sample. So now let's start talking about some of the data we can get from our populations and from our samples. The data we collect could answer statistical questions. A statistical question is one that can be answered with data that varies. And that just means that the answer to a statistical question has to differ. Let's look at the example of each country's favorite color. The question, which of the colors below do you like the most, is not a statistical question. That's a good survey question, but it's not statistical. This is not a statistical question because it is not answered by data that varies. One person only has one favorite color. Instead, a statistical question could be, what are the favorite colors of United States citizens? This is a statistical question because to answer it, I would collect data by asking people in the United States about their favorite colors. And there would be variability in the data. Not everyone has the same favorite color. In this graphic organizer, you can see some more examples of statistical questions. For example, what do 7th graders want to do for the fall festival is statistical because the data would vary. Everyone's going to have a different idea of what to do for the fall festival. The next question, what's the average grade on the semester exam in Mrs. Johnson's class? That's statistical because it's asking about an average. So let's look specifically at each of these statistical questions below and then think, if we wanted to know the answer to that, how can we collect the data? Is the data population or sample? And then why? So let's go through the first one together. Since we want to know what do 7th grade students want to do, we could always ask a survey. Now, if you can ask every 7th grader, that would be a population statistic. But if this is a bigger school and there's no way to ask every 7th grader what they want to do for the fall festival, you could always just survey the students in a given lunchtime. If you only asked a portion or a subset of students in 7th grade, that would be a sample statistic. When you give that survey to those 7th grade students, you want to make sure that your survey is unbiased, which means that it's fair and open-ended. And you want to make sure that the sample that you're collecting from is representative of the larger population. So asking during lunch would be good, but you don't want to only ask students who are on the planning committee for the fall festival. That would be a biased sample, and it would be not representative of the population. So the why part of this question is asking, why is the data a population or a sample statistic? Well, that depends on which one you chose. If you could ask every 7th grader, you chose population statistic. If you couldn't ask everybody, then you would have to do a sample, and that would be your why. Let's look at the next question. It says, what is the average grade on the semester exam in Mrs. Johnson's class? How would you collect the data? Pause the video, think about it, and press play when you're ready to check. So you could obviously ask Mrs. Johnson, or you could use the scores in her grade book. That way you're collecting that numerical data for the entire population. And since we wanted to find out the average grade on the exam, we would have to include all pieces of data. So we would need every grade. That's why it's a population statistic, and that's why. The next question is not a numerical data collection. It is a categorical data collection, which means that the data collected will not be a number or an average, but we could do it more like the first one and classify the data by type. So take a second, think about this by yourself, pause the video, and press play when you're ready to check. All right, so I said you could collect the data by using polls to call and ask people who they would vote for. When you did that, the question couldn't be leading in any way. You couldn't say, don't you think that the next president should be blank? You would have to ask, who do you want as your next president? The data I collected would have to be an example of a sample statistic because I couldn't ask every single American in the population who they want as their next president. You have to keep in mind that when you are collecting sample statistics, that your sample is representative of the population. For example, I wouldn't want to ask only people in Kentucky because that wouldn't be a good representation of Americans. And again, the reason why it would have to be a sample statistic is there's just too many people to call. I can't ask everybody. All right, so for the last question, how many students in your school ride the bus home? So let's pretend like you go to a really big school. If that was the case, you could ask people in your last period class. This would be a sample statistic because it would be difficult to ask every student in the entire school. All right, guys, that's it. If you in this video, please put in the comments a statistical question that you would like to see the data for. For example, I would like to see the data for which Hogwarts house do most 7th graders belong to. Today, we learned all about populations and samples. So now you should be able to determine the population and sample in real-world situations that involve data collection. So now you should go back to the calendar and complete any other assignments you have left for the day. Let me know if you have any questions. Bye.